How about salt in the diet? Because of course, the understanding is that too much salt will raise your blood pressure, and higher blood pressure will lead almost definitely to heart attack. You've got a whole chapter, maybe even 2 chapters on blood pressure, explaining blood pressure and the role of the heart in regulating blood pressure. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so yeah, the idea that salt causes high blood pressure is just because, when the body has low salt, it tries to hold on to as much salt as it can. So that happens in the kidneys. As the kidneys are filtering the blood, if there's not enough salt, they're trying to hold on to salt. Now, salt, these minerals have to be dissolved in water, and so in order to hold on to that salt, you hold on to water too. And so if you hold on to water, the thought was that was creating higher blood pressure, because there's more volume of fluid in the system, it creates more pressure in the tubes, right? And so so they were thinking that, the salt is causing this, when in reality it's the fact that you have too little salt that is causing your body to hold on to the salt and then therefore hold on to the water, right? So if we give ourselves adequate salt, then the body's like, we don't have to hold on to as much salt, we can let it go along with the fluid, right? And so then that will lower the blood pressure, which is exactly how some blood pressure medicines work. They actually trigger that system to flush out the fluid. They stop the holding on of it. So, but in reality, we're so deprived of the actual salts that we need. And then back in the day, we would have gotten lots of salts because the meat that we were eating was a little more bloody than it is today. They hang it today and let all the blood drain out as much as it can, where back in the day, we would have been eating a little more of that blood, which contains all the minerals. And so minerals are incredibly important for that. But there's actually, there's evidence that having too little salt and too little electrolytes actually creates a situation where you can create insulin resistance, which is a big marker or a big risk factor for high blood pressure, insulin resistance. So being low in salt actually can create high blood pressure in many different ways. I just described 2 of them. But also the most important thing about salt is that the heart, it doesn't just deliver the cardiovascular system doesn't just deliver nutrients through blood, whether it's fatty acids or vitamins, minerals, or whatever it may be. It doesn't just deliver those through blood. It also conducts electricity and magnetism through the blood itself. And what makes the water so conductive is the electrolytes, is the salt in the blood. That's what makes it very conductive. And so if we don't have enough of that, we're not getting as conductive of a signal through the fluid of the blood, the water in the blood. So that's very important as well. But yeah, it's just big miss. And there's actually studies where they showed that if they gave some people a diuretic, and then if they gave them a diuretic with salt or with the saline solution, that it was more effective. Because if you gave people salt, it said, we have enough salt, we can let go of more. We can let go of more salt, therefore letting go of more fluid. And so it makes no sense that people are being told not to eat salt. And that's exactly what I was told in the hospital whenever I had a heart attack was, here's a low salt diet. We got to prevent heart failure. And I knew that to be absolutely false. And I told them, I said, this is the diet that creates heart failure or creates high blood pressure. And they were just like, no, that's not what the research says. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to eat that way. So yeah, but that's a big misconception as well.
Right. So that's salt covered. You do actually talk about, people who want to avoid fish or who want to avoid red meat. Now, people who want to avoid red meat, they usually give those 2 sort of reasons. One is the TMAO, which we only recently started hearing about. That wasn't even a thing. So now there are days when it's actually trending on Google. So the TMAO, and you do cover it in the book, and of course mTOR. So TMAO, for those of you who haven't heard it, it's trimethylamine N oxide. So hopefully Dr. Hussey can tell us more about it. And Is it dangerous to health? So should we really worry about it? And does meat or fish contain more TMAO?
Fish actually does, which is why it's so contradictory that they're saying, oh, TMAO causes heart disease, because they're saying, oh, but fish is so good for you, red meat's not. And fish actually, and it's not that it necessarily has more, it's just that it tells your body to create more. But the thing is, and we have to step back and we have to take, like my answer to this question is a philosophical one. And I have a very technical answer to the mTOR question, but it's the same philosophical approach. We've gotten so bogged down in biochemistry and it's like this reductionist way of thinking, this like these linear systems, like this happens, then this happens, and this happens, we get disease. And that's just not how any complex biological ecosystem works. It doesn't work like that at all. There's many, last time I checked, I'm not exposed to one thing at one time. I'm exposed to many different things all at the same time. And so how can we ever expect to study this one molecule, TMAO, and say, yes, this is the driver of disease or a contributor to disease, right? It just doesn't make sense. It's just the same thing as LDL. How can we study this one thing and say, oh, this molecule is literally driving a whole disease process? Makes no sense whatsoever, because there's so many different moving parts and so many different reactions happening all at the same time. There's so many different things affecting my body all at the same time. So it's a very reductionist way of thinking, and it's a fear tactic, right? It's by the people that want us to think that meat is bad for us. They try and isolate these one things, and they show in a petri dish that maybe it caused some damage to a cell, which makes no sense, because that cell is not in the body anymore. How do we expect it to behave like it would in the body in its ecosystem? So it's a very flawed way of looking at physiology, but it's also incredibly short-sighted to think that one molecule in the body can drive an entire disease process or even contribute to it, right? We have to look at our entire state. We have to look at the body as a whole, right? We're trying to get narrower and narrower focus, and reduction is trying to identify the biochemistry of a certain disease process. And the way that the reason that is because the pharmaceutical companies are the ones that are driving the research. And if you can show that this one biochemical pathway is creating disease, and they can make a drug to affect that biochemical pathway, they make a lot of money. That's exactly what happened with statin drugs. It's what happened with all kinds of things. And so that's how the research is, like that's the way it's designed. And like in research, you're trying to eliminate all the variables, but to me, that is completely ridiculous, because humans are never exposed to one variable at a time. So how can you really say that that's anything, or that means anything? So that's kind of the spiel on all these little different, like even new 5GC and mTOR and TMAO, like all these different things. They're just all trying to say that meat causes them, and that contributes to disease. But they're really just trying to frame the meat. And if you look at all these studies, they're all funded by the grain industry or the sugar industry or whoever, the plant-based meat industry and whatever. So anyways, and then with mTOR is mammalian target of a rapamycin, and it's basically a kind of a trigger for growth and repair. And so they're thinking, oh yeah, if you have a lot of mTOR, you're going to get too much growth. That's cancer. We don't want that abnormal growth, right? Which is completely not true. Maybe it is in the long run, but there's a lot of things that have to go wrong for cancer to start, not just higher mTOR. But the issue with it is that they say that meat raises mTOR, and it does. That's what you want when you eat. You want to trigger growth and repair. You want to fix things. You want to grow muscle. You want to do that kind of stuff. That's exactly what you want to happen. The thing is that so the two things that trigger mTOR are insulin and leucine, the amino acid leucine. So meat has high in leucine, right? So it's going to trigger mTOR production and the raising of mTOR, but so is insulin, right? So the difference is that when you trigger mTOR with amino acid leucine, it does so for a shorter amount of time. I think it's like 30 minutes to an hour, something like that. Pretty short time. And that you get that growth and repair signal, and then it goes away, right? Whereas if you trigger it with insulin, so if you're eating a high carb processed food diet and you trigger insulin production, you're going to trigger mTOR, and it lasts for 3-4 hours. And the other thing is that when you eat a high carb processed food diet, you're going to be less satiated. And so you're going to eat again in 3 or 4 hours, and you're going to trigger it again. And then you're going to eat again in 3 or 4 hours, you're going to trigger it again. And so you end up having mTOR all day long. So is the problem the meat that triggers mTOR in a normal physiologic way, or is it the high insulin levels that most people are having because of their standard American diets, right? That's having mTOR triggered all day long, rather than just a few hours, maybe twice a day. So that's the issue there, and that's it. But I hope that what people take home from that is not that mTOR is fine. It's just that it's the flawed way of looking at biochemistry, which I don't think that hyper analyzing biochemistry and doing all this medical research based on biochemistry is really going to get us the answers to how to be healthy. It's just going to drive a fear-based pharmaceutical system, a fear-based supplement system, a fear-based food system. It's driving all this fear to try to encourage us to go one direction when really we shouldn't be. So
did you say insulin turns off, high insulin levels turn on mTOR?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why insulin resistance, you do cover it in the book as well, is an important marker of overall metabolic health, but also heart health. So let's talk about the insulin resistance.
Yeah.
How does it impact heart health?
The main way is that it leads to two different things. One is that if you're insulin resistant, your blood sugars are going to be higher, and higher blood sugars can, especially fluctuating higher blood sugars, can lead to more oxidative stress and inflammation that damage the lining of the artery. But the main way that insulin resistance contributes to heart disease in the sense of atherosclerosis is that insulin is a signal or can signal for growth and repair. And so if there's damage to the lining of the artery, they're supposed to be able to repair themselves. I mean, there's always going to be normal wear and tear to the artery because things are flowing, there's shear stress, and that's just normal. Just like in your car, there's going to be wear and tear, right? But we're supposed to be able to repair itself within a timely manner. However, if we're insulin resistant and that cell, the endothelial cell, never gets the signal to repair, then the damage stays there too long and the body has to do something else. It has to form clotting tissue on it to repair that damage. Because if it doesn't, then the artery could start bleeding from the artery wall itself, which could lead to a rupture, which is way more problematic short-term than clotting tissue on the lining of the artery that stabilizes it. And sometimes that clotting tissue has cholesterol in it because when it clots, cholesterol just happens to be around and it gets caught up in the thing. But there's no, like when you look at atherosclerosis, it's like 80 to 90% clotting tissue. There's really very little, if any, cholesterol in it. So that's the big player there, but it all has to do with insulin resistance. Like that's why there's such a heavy association with diabetes, which is insulin resistance, and atherosclerosis, because these people have lost the ability to signal for repair through insulin signaling. And that leads to the body having to do something else to repair that, which is, clotting tissue, which is kind of like this spackle that patches it up, but that's the main thing. And then long-term insulin resistance is, if we get more systemic insulin resistance, we get fluctuating blood sugars, which lead to all kinds of damage to vascular tissue, to small capillaries. So that's why diabetics get issues with circulation in the feet, with their eyes, with kidneys, things like that.
Next is fiber. So we're told fiber is protective of heart health. Mm-hmm. Do we have evidence for it?
No, there's really no evidence that fiber is protective for heart health at all. And these are Cochrane database studies, which is very kind of, I guess it's the most free, of bias from or of influence from different industry and things like that. But doesn't mean it's not free of it, but it's the least affected by it. But yeah, so if we look at all those studies, there's really no evidence that fiber is protective for heart health, or that fiber is necessary really for proper digestion or anything like that. Your body will, like, it all talks about like fiber and how important it is for like the gut bacteria and everything, but your body will burn, the gut bacteria will feed off of different amino acids rather than fiber if you remove fiber. And there's actually studies that show that if you remove fiber, you relieve constipation, and things like that. So it's all about, how your body transitions from going to that fiber. And I'm not going to say that fiber is this evil thing that's causing harm. There is some evidence that it can interfere with nutrient absorption. But I think that the main issue is that people are eating way too much fiber, because we're told to take these fiber supplements and take these prebiotic fibers and to eat all these grains and eat all these fruits and vegetables. And we're just told to eat and eat and eat all this fiber. And I don't think, fiber it's indigestible, it's insoluble. It just creates bulk. So you poop a lot, and then people are like, oh, look how good it's working. It's like, no, you're just pooping out stuff your body couldn't use. That's why you're pooping so much, right? And so if you remove that, then it stops interfering with nutrient absorption, and your body will adjust, and your digest just fine. And then there's no evidence that it prevents heart disease either. So it's really not that important of a nutrient as we're told. So, and at least definitely not in the amounts that we're told to eat it.
And may I just add here that I know a lot of my followers are low carbers, that a lot of low carbohydrate processed foods, from cookies to protein bars, etc., actually contain fiber from different plants, just the fiber part. So I know from personal experience, they completely wreck my gut. I just can't tolerate them at all.
Yeah. There's actually a diet. I can't remember what it's called exactly, but it was basically, it's basically removing fiber. And this was back in the 70s. Some lady, figured it out, and it's been around since then too, or before then too. But I remember when I was in college discovering this diet that was just like this lady was removing fiber and relieving all people's gut stuff. So it's been around for a while.
Now we're talking about gut health. How does it relate? How does it even link or connect to heart health?
Yeah, so the gut is the other organ that we sometimes associate with our emotional state. We have gut feelings about things, that kind of stuff, or we get stressed and our gut gets all messed up. We get that kind of stuff. So it's definitely connects to our emotional state. So it plays a role in signaling for balance in the autonomic nervous system. So it's very important there. So the state of our gut it's kind of like the gut is kind of like an external environment that's inside our body, because it's supposed to be at least sealed off all the way through. So if you think about it, we're kind of like a donut, and where it's got this tube going through. And then so that's kind of a link to what our external environment is like. It's one way that our body senses our external environment, by what's coming in and going through the tube, right? And so if it's in a state of inflammation and it's not functioning properly, that can definitely signal to the body that we should be in a stress state, which will then in turn affect the heart, because of the imbalance signaling in the autonomic nervous system, and how the heart is especially perceptive of that. That's good. Gut health is important for helping maintain balance in the autonomic nervous system, but also for because some of those bacteria produce different nutrients to help us with detoxification and just getting certain B vitamins and things like that. So important for that aspect of things as well.
And it's a similar story with oral health, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the health of our mouth is very important. If we don't have good dental health, we can get things like the main issue is endotoxemia, which is the same with gut. If we don't have good gut health, then we have leaky gut. Then that bacteria can leak into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there. The same with the mouth. We have gingivitis, or we have a root canal, or we have a tooth that's been pulled and wasn't cleaned out properly. Then that can leave us a situation where there's bacteria that are not supposed to be in the blood that are leaking into the bloodstream. And the body goes to attack those bacteria and kill them, and that releases endotoxins. So we get this endotoxemia, which is very heavily associated, like higher levels of endotoxins in the blood is very heavily associated with higher levels of atherosclerosis because they're very damaging. Anything that damages the lining of the artery is going to be linked with higher levels of atherosclerosis. And so the health of the gut and the mouth are very important as far as preventing endotoxemia.
Okay, so other things which are protective of your heart are obviously the collagen, which you did mention earlier on. But there are other nutrients as well, which only come from animal foods. And you list those. So there's carnitine, taurine, and creatine, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're equally
Yes.
important.
Yeah, they're very, very important for heart health. I mean, creatine itself helps maintain the function of the heart muscle, which the heart is a muscle. So we want adequate function and contracting of that muscle. Taurine is very important for healing the lining of the artery, and taurine we get in high amounts in things like pork and also like sardines are very high in taurine. And then and not really found in plant foods that much. And then carnosine is very important for healing the heart muscle too, and helping create a high functioning heart muscle. And then carnitine is probably the most important because carnitine is what allows us to use or to take fatty acids and allow the mitochondria to use them to burn for fuel. So that's very important as far as like mitochondrial health, which is very important for the heart because it's the highest in mitochondria. But carnitine has also been shown so there's a study they did where they induced a heart attack in rats. And then they used carnitine to prevent damage during reperfusion, which is when, like, because part of the heart muscle had lost blood supply for a while, and when they reperfused it, when they put blood back into that area, sometimes it can create some damage because it's just kind of an intense, stressful situation for the heart. But if they used carnitine, it prevented that damage during reperfusion. So it prevented scarring and damage, or I guess long-term damage, because it prevented scarring of the heart tissue itself. So carnitine, incredibly important. So it's one of the main things I did because I started taking a supplement of carnitine. I'd rather get it from food. I think that's always better. But after my heart attack, I wanted to, get a little bit more. So I supplemented with a little bit so that I could help prevent this deposition of scar tissue in my heart. And that's, I think that's what attributed to the fact that I don't have any scarring or less conduction of signal in my heart.
So one other thing related to diet is, of course, the vegetable oils. So seed oil, so we're talking about corn oil, sunflower oil, etc., and heart health.
Yeah.
What evidence do we have?
The main issue with those is that they seem to break your metabolism, or at least they don't help your metabolism. So if you're trying to burn these polyunsaturated fats, which is what vegetable oils are, then it actually doesn't trigger satiation very well. And so you can keep eating them and keep eating them and keep eating them, and you get too many calories. And so that's one issue with them, is that they seem to contribute to insulin resistance by breaking the mitochondria. And then the other issue is that they're very highly oxidized. They're very damaged, or they're easily damaged, which is why, as soon as you take them out of, the chemical process they use to make them, and they put them in light environments or heat environments, they become very oxidized and damaged. And those are very inflammatory. And so that can lead to damage to the lining of the artery. It can damage the mitochondria. It could just create this state of overall inflammation. And polyunsaturated fats, we need some of them, and their job is to, like, during an inflammatory process, help with that inflammatory process. That's why, a steak has the right amount of polyunsaturated fats for us. If we overeat those polyunsaturated fats, then we get an issue with inducing too much inflammation, because our body's having to use those polyunsaturated fats to build up, our cell membranes and things like that. And that leads to the state of just enhanced inflammation when we do have an inflammatory response. And then the final issue with the polyunsaturated fats is that they're from plant fats. Because there's this whole philosophy of plant fats versus animal fats. And we talk about, phytosterol is what plants use. That's plant fat. And cholesterol is what animals use, and we're animals, so we use cholesterol. But we can use phytosterol if in a pinch, if we need to, we can use it to do certain things, but it's not as good for us. So the main example is that it can get deposited around the heart valves. We have evidence for that, this phytosterol, so it can kind of clog up heart valves and make the valves go bad. And then the other thing is that if your body uses phytosterol to make in the structure of red blood cells, it actually makes them very rigid so that they can't bend very well. And so then when they're trying to go through these very small capillaries, they can't flex and bend to fit through them very well. And that can lead to or predispose us to things like stroke because it damages the very small arteries. And so we want those nice flexible red blood cells, and we need to make them of cholesterol, not phytosterol.
Fascinating. One last question that related. I don't think it was in the book, but talking about fish, for example, how worried would you be? I mean, you're trained in functional medicine as well. So how worried are you about mercury?
Yeah, I definitely worry about it. And the way to protect yourself from that is, first of all, limit your exposure to heavy metals and from other things, whether that's aluminum foils or cadmium from cigarette smoke, or different places where we get arsenic from rice and in the soils and things like that. But also, eat fish that are lower on the food chain, that have accumulated less mercury. That's the kind of the solution there. So for some reason, salmon seem to hold less mercury, but also smaller fish like sardines and anchovies and things like that that tend to have way less mercury. So I eat a can of sardines most days, not every day, but yeah. So eating those, and then also upping your detoxification pathways. So making sure we're sweating as often as we can, like getting the heavy metals out, and making sure that your liver is supported, and those heavy metal detoxification pathways are helping getting the metals out. So that's having enough sulfur, which you get from seafood and eggs and things like that, but also the right types of amino acids. So from collagen is really important. So it has a different set of amino acids that are helpful for the sulfonation of those heavy metals, so that your liver can extract them and get them out through detoxification pathways. So that's the signal. That's the solution to those heavy metals. Eating less of them by fish lower on the food chain, and then supporting detoxification.
So we covered the eating part quite extensively. I think my audience would agree here.
Yeah.
How about not eating, fasting? I think you do cover fasting as well in the book. So how important is it for heart health?
Yeah, I think that it's a strategy that can be used. There's definitely a lot of evidence that fasting will help with cardiometabolic risk factors. Again, those aren't the end all be all as far as assessing your risk of heart disease, but there's a lot of evidence there. I think it makes sense that there were times when humans, weren't constantly eating all day long, and this idea of 3 meals a day has definitely been marketed by the food industry very heavily. I think that, and I've actually, I used to think that just an 8-hour window, no matter when it was, or an 8 to 10 hour window, no matter when it was useful. I think that the morning is better, like eating earlier in the day and not eating later in the day, especially 3 to 4 hours before bed, just because of what it, as far as our natural circadian rhythm and how that helps with it. So I think that eating, within 30 minutes to an hour of waking is very useful, and then cutting your eating window off, 3 to 4 hours before bed is probably the best strategy. But yeah, fasting definitely makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. It's shown to have plenty of benefits. And there's some studies that show that even if you don't change what you're eating, if you just change when you're eating and you restrict the time, then you get the same benefits as if you changed what you ate. So I think still what you eat is very important too. But it's just interesting that the timing is also very important.
Stephen, let's talk about something that you call dopamine fast.
Yeah.
In the book, that was completely new to me, and I was fascinated by it. And it makes sense. Why do we need to take a break from the constant dopamine release? And how does
Yes.
it protect our heart?
Yes, dopamine is just this molecule that's secreted, kind of, it's like the reward kind of signal for your brain. So we get a little surge of dopamine every time we check something off a list, or every time we check our phones, check an email, or it's kind of like this little satisfaction thing. However, in today's society, I think that marketing companies, they know this type of thing, and so they put a lot of things in front of our face. They get us almost addicted to this dopamine surge, and when that happens, we just want more and more and more of it, and that can lead to this imbalance in the autonomic nervous system, because we're constantly seeking that surge of dopamine, and so what can be very useful is this thing that I heard of called dopamine fasting, where you literally go and you remove all sources of these surges of dopamine. So that means you're not eating, because that will surge dopamine. It means you're not watching TV, you're not reading, you're not talking to anybody. Literally what I do is I try and just go sit in the woods for as long as I can. And so some people do it for, half a day or a whole day. You just, if you can carve time out of your schedule to do that, then do that. But it could also be as simple as like doing an hour in like these sensory deprivation tanks, they have, where they have one here in my town where you can go and it's just like dark in there and you're floating in this high salt water. So you're just floating in the tub on your back, and it's dark and you don't hear anything, you don't see anything, you don't really feel anything because you're floating in water. And it's really like this sensory deprivation. So it's removing all these dopamine surges. So things like that can be incredibly useful as far as maintaining balance in our autonomic nervous system.
Are supplements important for heart health? Okay. In fact, not just supplements, but particularly vitamin D and K2, but also aspirin. If blood clot is a problem, then aspirin is a blood thinner. Are you in favor of that?
Right. So, well, aspirin first. So aspirin is, it's a blood thinner because it shuts down the healing process. So like if you get an injury and you want something to heal, then that's the COX signaling pathway is what will do that. And aspirin will shut that down. And so which will, inhibit a pain signal, it will shut down the inflammation and things like that. And so it will also thin the blood. And so that's what it's used for, or supposedly used for. However, there's no really evidence that a baby aspirin is preventative for a primary heart attack, so a first-time heart attack. There is some evidence that it's useful for prevention of a secondary heart attack, like people's second heart attacks. But I think there's much better ways to induce or to create adequate flow of blood and adequate viscosity of blood than taking an aspirin, because we don't want to shut down that healing pathway, that growth and repair pathway that it does shut down. So things like sunlight and grounding are how we increase blood flow and decrease blood viscosity. Those things are really important. Also, magnesium is very important. So yeah, that can be accomplished those ways without the negative side effects of aspirin, because aspirin, long-term use of it, has also been heavily associated with bleeding, like GI bleeding and things like that. And then vitamin D, I don't really think supplementing with it has shown much benefit. Very few times does it actually increase vitamin D levels. It can be anti-inflammatory just because when you're taking it, but it doesn't really increase the body's amount of it. Right. So in order to get the right increase vitamin D, you have to be in the sun, and you also have to have adequate cholesterol levels and adequate sulfur, because those are the things that the backbones of vitamin D. So you have to have those things with adequate sunlight, and that's what will raise your vitamin D levels, and that's the best way to get it to, because there's so many other benefits of getting sunlight. And then vitamin K2, really, really important for prevention of calcification of lining of the arteries. But also bone health, because it's what takes vitamin K2 is what's responsible for taking the minerals and depositing where they need to go, like in the teeth and the bones and things like that. It's what Weston Price named the X factor, or vitamin X, or whatever he called it, but he didn't know it was K2 at the time. But that's what these tribes of people that he was studying were so keen on getting, is this K2. But actually, statins can actually interfere with that process. But K2 you're going to find in high amounts in animal foods. So that's the most important way to get them, is in things like liver and egg yolks and butter and grass-fed butter and things like that. Like, we want to get high amounts that way and rely on supplements as little as possible, because they're synthetic vitamins and minerals. They're taken out of isolation food. We just don't know how well we're absorbing them, and they could also be in different forms. So always try and get as much as you can from food. But yeah, all those nutrients are important, but the way that we get them is also important as well.
Excellent. We're going to finish it off, Dr. Hussey, but why don't we tell our audience what tests would be useful for them? I mean, some would be covered by insurance in the United States, for example, and some of those tests are not covered here by our NHS, by the way, and I know because I've checked them out. But what tests would be important for people to follow their heart health?
I mean, I have a certain set of tests that I guess people could kind of get, but I don't like people to get into the weeds about testing. I don't think that we should dictate whether we're healthy or not, or we're at risk for something by any one test, because if you look at the research, these risk factors that we attribute to assessing for heart disease risk don't predict heart disease. They just don't. Doesn't mean that you can't take them and gain information from them. Doesn't mean I don't look at testing with my clients and stuff. But we have to take it with a grain of salt, and we have to take it within the context of the person as a whole. But generally, you want to measure metabolic health, which is a trig to HDL ratio, which you can get on a lipid panel, and then a fasting insulin level. Those are the two best indicators of how metabolic healthy we are. But also a leptin level could be very useful, because leptin resistance is what precedes insulin resistance. So that could be a really early sign of if things are going awry. And then you can measure inflammation and oxidative stress. So inflammation, you can measure, which is HSCRP, just a general marker of inflammation. And, oxidative stress, you can measure with a liver GGT. And those things could give you a good indication, but you could get into the weeds measuring those things. You can measure all kinds of stuff, but it's like, I'd rather you spend your money on other things, because whether or not these tests are high, it doesn't matter. The solution to bringing them down or keeping them normal, if they're normal, is the same thing. So just go and do those things. And then heart rate variability is also, I think, a useful thing to be tracking. And there's various devices you can use to track heart rate variability. Everything from it's Apple Watches or the Oura Ring or different things like that. You can use to track that, because that gives you that measure of balance in the autonomic nervous system and coherence of the body, which are the real telltale signs of whether or not you're going to have some disease process whatsoever.
And the coronary artery calcium score, is that important?
I mean, it can give you, I did a video on this recently, and it can give you an indication of how healthy your arteries have been over your lifetime, but it's not really a direct indicator of how at risk you are for a heart attack right now, because it gives you no information about inflammation or oxidative stress. It gives you no information about insulin resistance. It gives you no information about heart rate variability or balance in the autonomic nervous system. All it's doing is measuring if there's calcium in your coronary arteries. So I don't think it's the best test for measuring risk in the moment.
Well, what a wonderful conversation this has been. I could easily talk to you for another hour, Dr. Hussey, but I've got to leave you to start your day. I'm sure you've got patients waiting for you today. So thank you so much. And we're going to do this again. I'm sure my audience will love you. We're going to do this again, but this time Dr. Hussey and I will talk type 1 diabetes and only type 1 diabetes. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Of course, yeah, happy to be here. Hopefully people enjoy it.
Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.